I lived in the same house as my worst nightmare, and for a long time, no one noticed. My name is Helena, and this isn't one of those stories where everything works out in the end. No. Time, in fact, only made everything. I was only 14 when I began to understand what it meant to live in fear. Fear of speaking, of making mistakes, of existing. Oh, my mother was one of those women who carried the world on her shoulders and still apologized for stumbling. When my father died in a work accident, I was only 10 years old. She was devastated. That's when Arthur showed up. First as a family friend, then as a savior, finally as her husband. And my tormentor. He was charismatic with others, knew exactly what to say, what to wear, when to smile. But at home, he changed. Only with me. And that made me doubt my own sanity. Was I exaggerating? Was I the only one who saw the monster behind the mask? He didn't hit me. That made it even harder to explain. The abuse was invasive stares, poisonous words whispered when no one else could hear. Touches disguised as affection, a suffocating presence in the hallways, in the living room, even in my bedroom. My mother said I was rebellious, that I didn't accept her happiness, and over time, she started looking at me with the same eyes he used, with contempt, with distrust. I became silent. I stopped talking, eating, going out. My grades dropped. My friends drifted away. Even my grandmother, who always loved me like a daughter, began to doubt me when Arthur said I was making up stories to get attention. But I remember the first time he came into my room without knocking. I remember his breathing behind the door while I cried silently. I remember the day he said to me, with a smile on his lips, "No one will believe you, Helena. You know that, right?" That night, I knew I was alone. But I also knew that one day he would pay for everything. Today, when I look in the mirror, I hardly recognize that skinny, pale girl with eyes swollen from trying so hard to be invisible. But back then, she was all I had. And it was to her that I whispered before going to sleep, as if she were someone else. Just hold on a little longer. Just one more. And I held on. I endured every comment, every silence from my mother, every attempt to erase me. But what they didn't know was that the more they tried to destroy me, the stronger I became inside. The day everything exploded didn't start out any different. I was 17 years old. I was in my senior year of high school, and I was secretly preparing to get out of there any way I could. I had saved some money selling candy behind my mother's back, cleaning a neighbor's house, and helping an elderly teacher with technology. But Arthur found out. And what he did was worse than I could have imagined. He didn't yell. He didn't hit me. He didn't argue. He just walked into my room, threw an empty suitcase on the floor, and said, "Either you leave now, or I'll find a way to get you out of here myself." My mother was behind him, silent, arms crossed, like a shadow. I looked at her, and she looked at the floor. That was the moment I died inside. But it was also the moment something was born inside me. Something that would grow silently, and one day, come back to destroy everything he thought he had built. I left, with an empty suitcase and almost empty pockets. No diploma, no support, no one. But with a promise. They would see me again. But not as that broken girl. They would see me as the woman who turned pain into power. And what happened when he found out who I really was just the beginning. "You don't belong in this house anymore, Helena. You never did." Those were his exact words. Cold, surgical, no room for pleading. As if I were a mistake that needed to be deleted from a story that never wanted me. Arthur said them with that victorious look, the same look he gave my mother when she obeyed in silence, and to me when I lowered my eyes. He had waited years for that moment. He knew I was getting ready to leave, yes, but with dignity. I wanted to finish high school, go to college, maybe get a scholarship, start from scratch. But he was always one step ahead, always watching me with that sick obsession disguised as authority. What hurt me the most, however, was my mother's silence. There were no tears, there were no questions, not even a goodbye hug. She just turned her face away as I gathered my few clothes and stuffed them into a suitcase that, ironically, wasn't even mine. It was my father's suitcase, stored for years in the hallway closet. My mother only broke the silence when I picked up an old photo of us, in which she was smiling with me on her lap. Leave that there. It's not your place anymore. It's not your place anymore. The phrase echoed in my head as I dragged the suitcase down the stairs, each step feeling like a punch in the stomach. Outside it was raining. Of course it was raining, as if the world also wanted to see me soaked and invisible. I had nowhere to go, no close friends. My relatives? They were all distant and had been bought by the version of me that Arthur had spread about me. I walked for hours, aimlessly, until I stopped at a bus stop and curled up there, like an abandoned animal. My suitcase was soaked, my sneakers were worn out, and the cold was penetrating my skin and bones. I cried silently, because I learned from him that even crying out loud was wrong. That night, I slept on a park bench, wrapped in an old sweatshirt. I dreamed that my mother appeared and told me that it was all a misunderstanding, that I could come back, that I was loved. But when I woke up, all I found was a light drizzle, a shy sun, and a huge emptiness in my chest. In the days that followed, I was rejected everywhere I asked for shelter. At Aunt Sandra's house, who said she had no room. At the church where I grew up, where they looked at me as if I were a fugitive. Even the lady I helped with technology told me, embarrassed, that her husband wouldn't let me stay. I started sleeping on a bus that ran all night. I ate whatever I could get from distracted snack bars, leftovers from market stalls, or whatever someone gave me out of pity. It was in this state, hungry, dirty, and with eyes sunken from watching over my own body, that I saw Arthur again for the first time after being expelled. He was in an elegant coffee shop, talking to two men in suits. He saw me across the street and smiled. That smile. It was as if he were saying, "Look who survived," but not for long. I wanted to cross the street, to scream, to break the windows of the cafe and expose everything, but something stopped me. Something stronger than the impulse. Something whispered inside me. Calm down. It's not time yet. He won't win again. The humiliation, at that moment, became a seed. A strange, bitter seed, but alive. It fed on hunger, cold, loneliness, and grew. A few days later, I returned to my old neighborhood. Not out of nostalgia, but out of desperation. Maybe I would find an old acquaintance. Maybe I would find anything. That's when I saw the scene. Arthur, holding hands with a neighbor's daughter, an 11-year-old girl, smiling, joking around, sweetly holding her waist when she laughed too hard. It froze me inside. He wasn't going to stop. He never stopped, and no one saw. I, who had been silenced for years, was there, watching him start over with another victim. And I realized that what he took from me wasn't just my home. It was my childhood, my faith, my right to be heard. It was there on that day that I made a vow to myself. I was going to grow up. I was going to win. And one day, I was going to destroy him. Not for personal revenge, but so that no one else would ever have to go through what I went through. Before I could rise, I had to fall further than I ever thought possible. For a long time, the cold was my blanket, and the sidewalk was my mattress. People hurried past me, averting their gaze, and I understood. No one wants to face what reminds them that life can fall apart in an instant. I became invisible. At 17, my world had shrunk to a backpack with a few clothes, a toothbrush, and an old notebook with phrases I scribbled down to keep myself from going crazy. I slept in parks, taking turns with other teenagers in crowded shelters. I learned to shower in bus station bathrooms. I learned to smile to look less threatening, even when my heart was screaming. But what hurt me the most wasn't the physical abandonment. It was the emotional one. It was knowing that the woman who brought me into this world chose to protect a dirty man instead of believing in her own daughter. It was remembering the living room at home, the smell of coffee, the Sundays we watched movies together. As if it had all been just an illusion. One afternoon, I sneaked into the public library to shelter from the rain. I was soaked, cold, and too scared to leave. A security guard approached me. I thought he was going to kick me out, but he just said, "Stay in the corner, just don't make a mess." That day, I read a whole book for the first time. It was about a woman who escaped slavery and reinvented her life. I cried and sobbed, because there, on that paper, I found a mirror. I too was a captive of a story that had been imposed on me. In the days that followed, I returned to the library whenever I could. I read everything I could find, about law, psychology, human behavior. I started taking notes, as if I were preparing for something. But the truth was that I could hardly imagine a future. Every day was a challenge for survival. I hit rock bottom one night when I was approached by two men. They tried to drag me into an alley. I screamed, fought, bit, scratched. I managed to escape by the skin of my teeth. But I was left with bruises, fear, and a wound that would not heal anytime soon. I hid behind a dumpster, dirty, bleeding, and shaking with rage. It was the darkest night of my life. I thought about ending it all. Just another statistic, I thought. Just another lost girl. But then I remembered something I had read a few days earlier. If you're still alive, then you still have the power to change history. The next morning, with cracked lips and my soul in pieces, I knocked on the door of a support center for homeless youth. A social worker named Vera answered. She didn't ask why I was there. She just offered me hot tea and a blanket. I stayed there for weeks. Vera helped me get new documents, regularize my CPF, and resume my studies through EJA. She introduced me to a training course for administrative assistants. In that place, for the first time in years, someone called me daughter. But even with all the help, the pain was still with me. It slept next to me. It walked with me. It made me doubt everything. And when someone tried to get too close, I ran away. Because trust was a word that no longer existed in my dictionary. One day, during a support group, I asked Vera if she believed that a person could seek revenge without losing themselves along the way. She replied, "It depends. Do you want justice or do you just want to return the pain?" That stuck in my head. I knew. I wanted both. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for the other girls, for the child I was, for every night I cried in the dark, for every time someone told me, "You're overreacting." I wanted the world to know who Arthur was. I wanted him to fall. But for that, I needed to become someone with a voice, someone with power. That was when I stopped surviving and started planning. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to leave my mark on the world and mark the one who tried to erase me. When I was accepted into a technical administration program with a full scholarship, something inside me finally rose up. It was still fragile, like a flower sprouting from cracks in the ground, but it was new life. I was no longer that girl on the park bench. I was no longer the shadow of what Arthur had tried to turn me into. At 18, with my EJA diploma in hand and an internship secured at a logistics company, I began to breathe again. For the first time in a long time, I rented a room. Small, yes, with mold on the walls and traffic noise, but it was mine. My key, my door, my refuge. And it was there, sitting on the cold floor, with a computer borrowed from an NGO, that I opened the first file. Plan for Justice, Arthur. Yes, I wrote that title, because I knew that to destroy someone so meticulous, I had to be even more calculating. My revenge couldn't be passionate. It had to be precise. I began to study obsessively: law, marketing, psychology, social media, people analysis, body language, how internal investigations work in companies, how to expose a criminal without falling into the trap of slander. I found out how to access public records, financial histories, and filed complaints. I found out that he had never been arrested, but there were old, discreet, informal complaints. They all disappeared mysteriously. Perhaps paid off, perhaps silenced. My internship brought me into contact with lawyers, auditors, and directors. I observed everything, absorbed everything. I became the intern that no one noticed, and that invisibility, for the first time, was a weapon. Over time, I started to get attention, but for the right reasons. I delivered good reports, anticipated problems, and took initiative. I was promoted. I started studying at night, saving every penny. In business school, I became close to a professor, Dr. Renata, a specialist in corporate compliance and institutional whistleblowing. The woman was a force of nature, intelligent, relentless, ethical to the core. When she told me about a social startup project focused on protecting women, I felt my heart beat in a way it hadn't in years. After class, I stayed behind. I waited for everyone to leave. Then I asked, if I wanted to destroy someone, legally, with proof, what would I do? She looked at me, serious. Do you want justice or do you want a spectacle? I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through, I replied. She took a deep breath and said, then you need a solid strategy. Names, dates, documents, and most importantly, a reason bigger than yourself. That's when the spark turned into a fire. I spent the next few months digging. I found out that Arthur was now the manager of a technical school, where girls between the ages of 12 and 18 attended. The mere thought made me nauseous, but I confirmed it. His name was on the website. He even had praise. I created a fake student profile. I sent emails asking about enrollment, fees, schedules. He replied to one of them. Friendly, helpful, and, of course, using the same ambiguous language he used with me. Subtleties, compliments out of context. I saved everything. I created a dossier. Every conversation, every piece of information, every profile he followed on social media. Some clearly belonged to teenagers. I talked to Dr. Renata again. I told her my story, for the first time, in its entirety. She cried, but she didn't try to comfort me. She just said, "You have a chance here, but you have to do everything calmly. Are you ready?" I am, because the girl he destroyed, she's been reborn. I started investing in a new project with the teacher's support, an anonymous reporting platform for schools with legal support. In 6 months, the project won an award at a university fair. We got media attention, invitations to interviews. The first article that came out in the newspaper said, "Startup led by young violence survivor becomes national reference in student protection." And when Arthur read that, he must have choked up. Because I was in the article. My face. My full name. Helena Duarte. The girl he kicked out of his house. The girl he thought he had erased. Sometimes the best revenge is the one your enemy doesn't even notice. Until it's too late. The news with my face plastered all over it spread quickly. In a few days, I received dozens of messages, some supportive, others curious. But the most important ones came silently, by email, from generic addresses, with short texts and no signature. He did that to me too. My father never believed me. I'm afraid to tell, but I know I wasn't the only one. The victims began to emerge. Similar stories, frightening patterns, repeated looks, phrases identical to those he said to me. The Arthur I knew was not an isolated case. He was a repeat offender. And by all accounts, he got worse over time. That man hadn't just hurt me. He had trained me, conditioned me to silence. And now, ironically, it was that silence I was learning to break, with precision. I needed to get close without raising alarm. I created a new identity, a new profile. I introduced myself as Laura F., an educational project consultant interested in partnerships with technical schools. I had an impeccable portfolio, a fake website, and an irresistible proposal to transform the institution where he worked into a national model of security and innovation. It didn't take long for him to respond. "Can we set up a meeting?" He wrote, always helpful, always trying to please. "Sure, I have an opening this week," I replied. Our meeting was set for Tuesday at 10 a.m. at a discreet coffee shop. I arrived wearing sunglasses, a red blazer, my hair tied back, and a slightly forced accent. I knew he wouldn't recognize me. He was too vain to remember someone who was no longer useful to him. He stood up and shook my hand enthusiastically. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Laura." "The pleasure is all mine, Arthur." I recorded the entire conversation with a hidden recorder in my belt. Every word, every insinuation, every malicious smile. During the meeting, he let slip too much information. He talked about the school's lax management. He mentioned the names of teachers who were his accomplices. He laughed when he said that teenagers are always dramatic when they feel rejected. He even talked about a lawsuit that mysteriously disappeared. When the meeting was over, he offered me a ride. "I have my car," I said. "Thanks, but I'd rather walk. It helps me think," I replied with a polite smile. I left there trembling, not out of fear, but out of rage. Not only had he not changed, he was more confident than ever. Shielded by years of impunity, he had built a reign of manipulation with the same arrogance as always. But now he was being watched. Every step, every word, every move. I returned to the school at another time, as an official representative of the startup, with my true identity. And this time, I brought journalists with me. The principal, desperate for visibility, opened the doors for us. Arthur was not there that day. We visited classrooms and talked to students. Some of them looked at me strangely, a mixture of relief and fear. I recognized that look. It was the same one I had when I was 14. I left brochures with the contact information for the reporting platform. In less than 72 hours, we received 19 reports. 4 of them described abusive behavior by the same employee, Arthur. The bomb was set. But I wasn't in a hurry. I knew he needed to be destroyed slowly, just like he did to me. I started strategically releasing information on social media. Nothing direct, just questions. Do you know who is around your children at school? Have you ever wondered why certain employees never leave, even with rumors? What if your daughter was afraid, and you didn't know? The posts went viral, and little by little, the town started to comment. Whisper. Look suspiciously. Arthur sent me a message, concerned. Helena, I saw your posts. Is everything okay? His tone feigned concern, but I read between the lines. He was beginning to sense danger. I replied with a simple sentence. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it always finds its way out. He tried to cover his tracks. He sent me messages. He sent me an invitation to talk peacefully. But I didn't respond. Because in that game, whoever says the least commands. Meanwhile, we gathered more evidence. A lawyer from the startup filed a formal complaint with the public prosecutor's office. The local press began to investigate. The school panicked, and Arthur began to feel it. He started sweating in the hallways. He began making mistakes in meetings. He avoided students. He lived in fear. It was only the beginning. Arthur's smiles began to disappear. His confident posture gave way to restless eyes, tense shoulders, hands that trembled as he leafed through papers. He began to walk faster through the school hallways, avoiding encounters, closing the classroom door even when he didn't need to. The man who once walked into my room as if he owned everything now looked like a cornered animal, and I watched. From afar, but present. Always present. The anonymous reports multiplied. Stories that repeated the same pattern. Invitations after hours, uncomfortable gifts, ambiguous phrases, touches that crossed the line of decency. A former student said he tried to kiss her in the parking lot. Another said he promised exchange program spots in exchange for discretion. Everything was documented. Everything was recorded. And most importantly, everything was backed up with evidence. The following week, the prosecutor's office opened an investigation. The school administration was summoned to provide clarification. The news leaked. The first headline appeared on a local blog. Technical school employees suspected of inappropriate conduct with students. The name did not appear, yet. But everyone knew. Arthur was the only one mentioned in all the behind-the-scenes conversations. Parents began to apply pressure. The students, encouraged, spoke with less fear. He tried to get ahead of the game. He posted a video on social media saying he was the target of a smear campaign. He used words like persecution, injustice, and slander. He spoke in the name of God. He said he was fighting for family and traditional values. But the video had the opposite effect. The comments section was flooded with reports, accusations, and memories. People who had studied with him decades ago said, "I knew something was wrong. He was always strange. I remember a similar story." The tide had turned. The following week, Arthur was removed from the school. Officially, it was for health reasons. But it was obvious. He was being exposed, undone, in front of everyone. I received an email from him. It was short. "Helena, please, let's talk. You won. You don't need to continue with this." I won? That was his problem. He always saw everything as a game in which he was the master, the manipulator, the only one with the right to play. And now, seeing the pieces fall apart, he was playing his last card, victimization. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent copies of the updated dossier to the media outlets that were now demanding more forceful responses. One of them, a regional newspaper with a wide reach, published on its front page, "The voice of those who were silenced, the case of systematic abuse at a technical school." And there was his name, Arthur Braga, with a photo, with a timeline, with transcribed quotes. His face became the symbol of what is most sickening about the system that covers up educated predators. From then on, everything fell apart. His wife, my mother, was pressured by neighbors and relatives. She tried to defend him publicly. She said it was all made up, that ungrateful girl, me, was doing it out of revenge. But all it took was an old video to surface, in which Arthur appeared giving a dubious hug to a 14-year-old student, for her speech to crumble as well. Many wondered, How could she never have seen it? How could she have kept quiet? Maybe she did see it. Maybe she chose not to see it. Or maybe she was also a victim, not in the same sense, but trapped in a relationship where believing her daughter required too much courage. The fact is, she disappeared. She stopped posting. She closed the store. She moved to another city, and he was called in for questioning. He left the police station with his head covered, cursed by angry mothers and students holding signs. I believe her. I will never be silenced again. It's not injustice. It's too late. I saw everything from the window of a cafe, alone, in silence. And when he looked to the side, instinctively, he saw me. We stared at each other for 2 seconds. 2 seconds that carried more than a decade of pain, fear, shame. And for the first time, he was the one who looked away. In the days that followed, his social media accounts were deleted. Friends disappeared. Partners distanced themselves. Even his brother, who had always been an indirect accomplice, posted a note saying he was shocked and disappointed. But I knew there was still more to be done, because the public trial was just beginning, and I wasn't going to let the story end there. The public hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. I received the notification as part of the collective responsible for the complaint, thanks to the project I created. His name was there, cold and printed, next to the word defendant. It was almost symbolic, because for years, I was the one who carried the label of crazy, rebellious, ungrateful. Now, the roles had changed, and he knew it. This time, there was no hood, no smiles. Arthur entered the room like a man crushed by a weight he himself had created. His wrinkles seemed deeper, his gaze emptier. He wore a dark, ill-fitting suit, as if even he no longer believed in appearances. I sat in the front row. He saw me, and he froze. For a second, I thought he was going to faint. I saw his pupils dilate. His face turned white. He blinked, as if time had gone back 20 years, and I was still that girl with wet eyes in the corner of the room. But I wasn't. That girl was dead. The woman standing there now was the woman he had unwittingly taught to be strong, to resist, to plan. During the testimonies, each word was like a stone being placed on the gravestone of his reputation. He called me to talk after class and locked the door. He said if I told anyone, I would lose my place. He made me feel like it was my fault. The voices of the girls who were now women cut through the room like razors, firm, clear, painful. I knew that remembering would open old wounds, but it would also close the cycle. It was shouting to the world, it was never our fault. Arthur was sweating. He wiped his face every 2 minutes. He tried to look calm, but his feet wouldn't stop moving. When he was finally called, his voice was a shadow of what it once was. These accusations are absurd. I've always been respectful. He choked, staring at his own shoes. What about the Helena Duarte case? The prosecutor asked bluntly. Do you admit that she was your stepdaughter? That she lived under the same roof? That she left home at 17 after an alleged argument? He hesitated. His eyes darted in my direction. He looked at me as if searching for a hole to hide in. Helena was complicated. She always made things up. She wanted attention. She's here. You can talk to her directly, the prosecutor said. And then he did what I never thought he would have the courage to do. He tried to smile. Helena, I never wanted to hurt you. It pierced me like a thorn. But for the first time, it didn't hurt. I stood up. I took a deep breath. And I said, You called me a liar for years. You made my mother doubt me. You kicked me out with nothing. And now when the world sees who you are, you come and call me complicated? No, Arthur. I'm not complicated. I'm a survivor. And you're the predator who taught this girl to become a hunter. The room fell silent. Then, discreet applause began. First from a group of women, then from the lawyers, till the judge asked for silence, his eyes brimming with tears. Arthur couldn't respond. He sat down. He collapsed. For the first time, he was naked before the truth. On the way out, a reporter approached me. Helena, is there anything you'd like to say to those watching at home? I thought for a moment, and I replied, It's not about revenge, it's about justice. And about showing that no girl needs to grow up in fear and silence. The voice they tried to silence in me today echoes through many. The following week, Arthur was formally charged with abuse, harassment, and administrative impropriety. More than 20 women joined the lawsuit. He lost everything: his house, his job, his family. And more than that, he lost his mask. And when I finally returned to my old street, not as a cowering girl, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself, I saw a torn poster with his face painted red. I smiled, not out of pleasure, but out of peace. After the public trial, the doors that Arthur had closed so tightly to me began to close on him. Not just legally, but socially. And that, as he would soon realize, was an even crueler sentence. The newspapers now printed headlines with his full name, followed by terms such as accused, predator, and former employee suspended under suspicion. Families withdrew their children from the school where he worked, demanding audits and a complete overhaul of the staff. The principal, previously his silent accomplice, resigned for personal reasons. Teachers who had remained silent were pressured to testify. And the school, until then well regarded, became synonymous with scandal. In the neighborhood where he lived, walls were spray painted with words such as monster, abuser, and the truth has won. His house, once tidy and discreet, now had its windows closed day and night. He only left the house covered up, as if he were always running from the light. And perhaps he was. The criminal justice system followed its course. The evidence, the testimonies, the printouts, the documents, everything was meticulously organized. I participated in the structuring of the complaint as an external collaborator of the NGO I founded. But I kept my distance from the emotional side, because now the law would take care of that, and I had already done what was necessary. Arthur was sentenced to 9 years in prison. When reading the sentence, the judge said something that echoed in my mind. The defendant used his position of trust to manipulate, coerce, and silence vulnerable victims. But it was the courage of one of those victims that brought to light what so many tried to hide. Courage. It took me years to see myself that way. I always thought courage was something for people who faced danger head-on, with their chests puffed out. But sometimes, courage is simply about surviving. It's not letting yourself be silenced. It's rebuilding a voice that was forcibly taken away and using it to protect others. My mother called me the next day. I didn't answer. She left a message. "Helena, I'm so sorry, I was blind. I didn't know how to help you. Forgive me." I listened, and I cried. But I didn't answer. Not yet. Maybe someday. The wound with her was different. It wasn't anger, it was sadness. It was mourning for someone who was still alive, but who chose the wrong side when it mattered most. And even if she was sorry now, it wasn't my place to forgive her. In the following months, my NGO received funding. We started working in more than 10 states, creating support networks and reporting channels in schools, churches, and community centers. Women began to connect, to help each other, to come out of the shadows. And one day, during an event in São Paulo, a 13-year-old girl hugged me. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "If it weren't for your video, I would never have told my father what my uncle did to me." At that moment, I understood. It was all worth it. The hunger, the cold, the sidewalk, the absence. It was all fuel for something bigger. Arthur fell into a deep depression in prison. He tried to negotiate a reduced sentence. He tried to get transferred. He tried to appeal. But this time, the system was against him. And he knew that even if he got out, he would be a tainted man. No name, no credibility, no place to go back to. He sent me a letter, handwritten. It said, "You won, and I'm dying in here. Not because of prison, but because I finally understand what I did. I will never be forgiven, nor do I want to be. I just needed to say that you were the only person I never managed to break." I kept the letter, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Monsters feed on fear. And when the victim stands up, they lose their power. One day, I walked past the house where I grew up. It was empty for sale. The open windows let the sun in where there had once been shadows. I stood there, across the street, just watching. I didn't feel like going in, because that place, which had once been my hell, no longer belonged to me. I had built another home, inside myself, and no one could take that away from me. Today, I am 29 years old. Sometimes people ask me how I can move on after everything I've been through. How to rebuild what was broken when I was so young. How to love again, trust, smile. After so many years of swallowing my tears, The truth? There is no formula. Every scar takes time to heal. Some hurt forever. Others become silent marks that remind us of who we are. But they all tell an important story. You survived. And that is already a revolution. I currently live in a small apartment in downtown São Paulo. My walls are white, with colorful pictures that I chose carefully. Every detail was designed to remind me that I am safe, that I am the owner of my space, my body, my life. I opened a branch of the NGO in the capital, and today I lead a team of more than 40 people. We respond to more than 12,000 reports per year, but it's not just about numbers. It's about the stories behind them. Every young person who comes in crying and leaves with their eyes fixed on the floor reminds me that my pain has given rise to new life, that I have turned suffering into structure, that I have made pain a shelter. And sometimes when I'm alone in my room, I look up at the ceiling and think, you did it, Helena. Against all odds, you won. The other day, I received an invitation to speak at an international conference on restorative justice and human rights. The title of my talk? The Girl Who Didn't Stay Silent. I smiled when I read it, because, yes, that's what I was. A girl who learned too early that silence was a prison, but who also learned that her voice, no matter how small, could become an avalanche. On that stage, in front of hundreds of people, I told my story, without fear, without shame. And at the end, an older woman, with tears in her eyes, came up to me and said, I wish I had had your courage at 15, but now I want to learn from you. And I replied, it's never too late to find your voice. What about Arthur? He remains in prison. I received news that he filed a new request for parole, but it was denied. There are still pending cases against him. Other victims feel stronger every day. Justice may be slow, but it comes. And even when he gets out, if he gets out, he will be just a broken man. A tarnished name. Someone whose crimes are public. The mask has fallen. The myth is dead. And that is all he never knew how to deal with, being seen for who he really is. We never spoke to each other again in person. I heard she moved to the countryside, that she lives alone, that she is trying to start over. I don't know if we will ever see each other again. Some pain needs to be respected in its own time. For me, forgiveness is not forgetting. It is letting go of the weight of others. And today, I walk lighter. I often visit a square where years ago I slept on the furthest bench. The first time I went back there, I sat in the same place. I closed my eyes and imagined myself hugging that girl, malnourished, scared, trembling with fear. I said to her softly, you didn't break, you blossomed. And all of this would one day make sense. Now, when people ask me what I would do differently, I answer, nothing. Because every pain pushed me forward. Every abandonment taught me to put down roots. And every injustice made me swear that if I survived, I would use all of it to prevent others from going through the same thing. And that's what I do, every day, with my head held high, with a steadfast soul, with the voice of the girl who once slept in silence, but woke up with a roar that the whole world heard.